this is very friendly. We're not. This is not going to be like we had another little blow up with somebody else. That was a much different. This is a very friendly conversation.
Okay, the blow-up that President Trump was referring to there was he was talking about the heated Oval Office meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky back in February. For more on what happened today, though, we're joined now by Massachusetts Democratic Representative Seth Moulton. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here, sir. We met after that meeting with Zelensky. I mean, you called it an embarrassment to American history. None of that drama today. How would you describe what seems to have happened between the Prime Minister and the President today?
Well, I think everyone holds their breath for White House meetings now, and this was pretty good. We've gone from attacking our allies to just making smug comments. It's still a bit embarrassing as an American, but it's a lot better than what we saw with Zelensky.
You know, the tone was friendly, but he's still talking about making it economically impossible for Canada to sustain an auto sector. He's still talking about how really it's a much better deal if we all just join you here and become the 51st state. I mean, how do you interpret the friendly tone, the praise from Mark Carney as an individual, but still these aggressive views on what he wants for the bilateral relationship?
I mean, look, the problem is you can't trust Trump because he's just not a trustworthy person. We know that he lies all the time. But it's also just not clear what his strategy is. And I hear this from fellow members of Congress who are on the other side of the aisle, from Republicans, who say, I don't really know, is he pursuing these tariffs for a long-term plan to restore American manufacturing? This is what it sounds like when he talks about enduring some pain for a little while only to get businesses to come back home. Or is he just doing this as a short-term negotiating strategy? It's one or the other, right? You're not going to get factories back if it's just a short-term negotiating strategy. So we really don't know what the plan is. And I think increasingly Trump clearly does not understand how this is going to hurt us in America. And once that starts hitting home, we might see a different approach to the tariffs.
Well, see, that's the thing, right? Like, because it is being defended as either a visionary transformational plan or a purely transactional leverage play, and those are contradictory. We're seeing disruption in our auto sector in Canada, right? Stellantis has, you know, and I believe it's General Motors in Oshawa. We're seeing, you know, hours of work being lost, shifts being shut down, and layoffs in some cases. What is it going to, you know, I've seen General Motors put out a statement saying the tariffs on this side of the border will cost them $5 billion.
Yeah.
That's not nothing. So what is the evidence of the pain moving through the supply chain in the United States that may catch the president's attention at this point?
Well, we don't know exactly what it's going to be, but it's very early. And a lot of these numbers that are being thrown around now haven't really hit home in terms of jobs lost, in terms of prices skyrocketing for autos. You can go to, you know, I think you can go buy an auto today, the price hasn't changed that much, but everyone's anticipating them to go up a lot. So it might take some time for Trump to realize his pain. But remember, Trump's also very good at backtracking and changing his mind and completely, you know, just pretending that he had this idea all along. So we could see a full reversal on tariffs. Understand, I'm not predicting that. I can't predict the mind of Donald Trump.
I hear you.
But anything is possible at this point, and that's just kind of what people have to be prepared for.
Well, he was asked that today. One of the journalists said, is there anything that Mark Carney can say to you today to get you to drop the tariffs against Canada? He said, no. And they said, why not? He goes, that's just the way it is. And it sort of just ended there, right? So the tone is better, but the tariffs are still in place. And the economic uncertainty and damage is still sort of rippling on both sides of the border. So they're going to have more talks. Officials are going to start talking to try to reset the rules of the trade relationship like we did the last time he was president. And then they'll meet again at the G7 next month. I mean, what do you hope to see between now and the 15th of June?
I just hope to see some realism from the administration, some recognition of how this is going to impact the very workers that Trump claims to be supporting. Obviously, he's listening to his friends on Wall Street. He's already walked back some of the tariffs in response to feedback from the street. But this is really going to hurt the American people, too. And that has not hit home yet for the president.
Where are your Republican colleagues on this? Because, you know, we've talked to a lot of Democrats and some Republicans on our show about this. And, you know, one of the Republicans we had on said that people were being emotional, the markets were being emotional. You just got to give it time and trust in President Trump, which is a difficult thing to do when you're Canada. But where are, you know, the members of the House, the members of the Senate in terms of trying to take back their constitutional control over tariff and trade policy and down tools in this trade war?
I mean, David, have you ever seen a dog fixated on a bone and you move it around, and that's the Republicans following Donald Trump. As he goes from one position to the other, they just support him. And it's not fulfilling their constitutional duty in Congress. It's not upholding the oath that they took to make sure they're representing their people and not just being subservient to a president. The reality is Republicans are just following Trump right now, and I don't know what it's going to take for them to start doing their job.
I wonder, though, you say the economic damage is not being felt yet, but like 3 to 6 months is kind of a lag. You see a lot of people predicting of where it will go. And you are seeing, this is very granular kind of trade data, but you're seeing containers coming back from China empty. Ships are going over to bring things over because of the tariffs. They're coming back without goods to bring in. Eventually, the ships are just going to stop going. And there is going to be scarcity, and there's the inputs for your manufacturing sector are just not going to be there. And so the outputs won't happen. I mean, by the end of the summer, there's real potential for the sectors and the people the president says he wants to help. They could be really feeling some significant economic pain.
This is the first time in history I think we've had a major recession caused by one man, but that's what we're headed for.
As a choice, right?
now. As a choice, because he just doesn't understand basic economics.
They're going to renegotiate the trade deal, though, it seems. Like this is the start of it. This is how Mark Carney described it today, that they began the process of renegotiating that particular arrangement. Look, Canada obviously has some things they're going to want changed. Trump has some things he's going to want changed. Aside from what the president is trying to do on that trade relationship, what do you and your Democratic colleagues think needs to change in the Canada-U.S. relationship? There are always irritants within the normal scope of irritants. What are some of the things you hope gets done there outside of the bigger things that Trump is dealing with here?
Look, I'm the exact opposite of Trump. I want to see more trade with our northern partner. I think that we have complementary economies that when Canada does well, America does well too. He takes a very zero-sum approach to this, that America is doing bad if other countries are doing well, including our allies. I just totally disagree with that. So I would like to see stronger trade deals, not weaker ones.
The president, though, was throwing numbers on the table today. We're subsidizing Canada to $200 billion a year, sort of lumping, the gap in our military spending on the NATO target in with currency exchange, in with trade deficits. So you're not dealing from like a common understanding of things, right? And I just wonder, has the American public completely bought that argument? Howard Lutnick said yesterday that we're a socialist country feeding off America. Is that the view, do you think, in the broader American landscape right now of how Canada is functioning as a trade partner, as a defense partner?
Well, I think what you have to understand is that there are a lot of Americans who are just very frustrated with the economy, because the economy is doing very well for people on Wall Street, not so well if you're working in a factory and trying to see your wages go up, and instead what you see is prices going up at the grocery store. So it's important to acknowledge that Americans are frustrated. I don't know if they buy the president's explanation. Some of them clearly do. But that will change as they see the real results of this trade war, which I don't think are going to be good for American workers at the end of the day.
The focus has really been on tariffs and trade because of the immediate shock that represents to the economic well-being of both countries. But there is a larger conversation happening, too, about the security and defense relationship. And with NORAD and with NATO and with what's happening in the Arctic right now, I mean, there's significant short, medium, and long-term strategic and geopolitical issues at stake for both of our countries. Canada is talking about moving on to buying more military hardware from European suppliers instead of American suppliers, because when someone's talking about absorbing your country, how can you buy their military hardware, right? So, I mean, what's the level of concern inside Congress and inside the Senate on that particular level of disruption, or is the focus just overwhelmingly on the economic side right now?
Well, I think the focus is more on the economic side, but obviously there is this discussion focused more on Europe, on what role NATO members will play and how they're going to step up. Everyone in America wants NATO to do more. I think it's really short-sighted to try to distance ourselves from NATO, to try to push responsibility on our partners so much so that they don't buy American weapons, for example. That's not going to help America in the long term. But look, just think about this. The single greatest threat that we face as the United States of America, at the end of the day, is a nuclear attack from Russia or China. Those missiles are going to come over Canada, right? Canada might be the first to see that this defense partnership that we have had for a long time is important for American national security. It's not just about what happens in Europe with NATO, it's about U.S. national security. And that's why there are a lot of people on Capitol Hill, Democrats in public, but Republicans in private, because they're too scared to say it publicly, who absolutely support NATO, want to see NATO strengthened, want to see more contributions from our partners, but also want to see us continuing to work hand in hand on defense against adversaries like Russia and China and Iran, North Korea, other countries around the globe that frankly wish us ill will.
So, Congressman, just as a final question, I mean, it sounds like the relationship might be in a better place, at least tonally, and on the leader-to-leader basis. And that's not nothing. And, you know, the interpersonal dynamic is going to matter with a president like Trump, I would argue. What do you hope to see? What are you watching for over the next couple of weeks to see that there really is a change and that maybe things can move for the better?
Look, Donald Trump is very transactional, but he's also very personal, right? And that means that the relationship that these two men have is important. I think the Prime Minister did a really good job of furthering that relationship today.
Okay. Congressman, really good to be in person. Thanks so much. That's a Democratic Congressman, Seth Moulton from Massachusetts, joining me here today.
You know, I'm a real estate developer at heart. When you get rid of that artificially drawn line, somebody drew that line many years ago with like a ruler, just a straight line right across the top of the country. When you look at that beautiful formation when it's together, I'm a very artistic person, but when I looked at that beauty, I said that's the way it was meant to be. But you know, I do feel it's much better for Canada.
Well, if I may, as you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, you know, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever.
But never say never. Never say never.
Okay. Though Trump says never say never to Canada's annexation, you can see Mark Carney there making his stance clear, mouthing the word never, I think 5 times at the end of that exchange. So here now to discuss what we saw today is Rhode Island Democratic Representative Seth Magaziner. Congressman, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being here today, sir.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, I think the last time we spoke, you introduced the No Invading Allies Act in Congress. He's still talking about it, though he did say he didn't think, on Sunday in Meet the Press, the president said he didn't think military action would be required. Where do you think things are today after hearing what the president said in his meeting with the Prime Minister?
Well, I'm glad to hear the president softening at least somewhat as it relates to Canada and, you know, taking military action off the table. And perhaps we're seeing, you know, some backtracking from him on these tariffs, which would be a disaster for both countries. So that's a positive. But that being said, in the same Meet the Press interview, where the president said that he didn't envision military action against Canada, he refused to take it off the table when it came to Greenland. And obviously, any sort of military action against allies of the United States and allies of Canada in our own hemisphere would be profoundly destabilizing. So I'm glad to see the president softening his stance as it relates to Canada, at least somewhat. We still have more work to do there, but you know, I'm going to continue to stay strong on this because the United States should not be invading any of our allies, and certainly not in our own hemisphere.
Yeah, and Greenland, of course, in Canada, Greenland being a territory of Denmark, a founding member of NATO, Canada being a member of NATO, there's a whole bunch of implications if the president ever makes good sort of on the rhetoric there. He did seem friendlier with Prime Minister Carney today compared to when he was calling former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau the governor of Canada. You know, he hasn't moved off some of the more contentious policy goals, but rhetorically, it seemed an improvement. How do you interpret that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the Prime Minister handled himself very well today. I think he was friendly, but also firm and confident. And there does seem to be a softening in some of the rhetoric from President Trump, which is good. Again, like still more work to do. I'm very much of the view that these tariffs do not serve the interest of the American people, certainly don't serve the interest of Canada either. We don't need higher prices on consumers right now. And you know, I'd like to see more progress made on that, but I think today was a very good first step.
Well, you know, the president stayed persistent today in his view that the United States does not need Canadian goods, don't need oil, don't need car, don't need lumber, don't need steel, don't need aluminum. With those sort of positions being put on the table, I mean, how do you see these trade talks going if they start from those beliefs as an opening position?
I don't think that President Trump has a coherent strategy, when it comes to tariffs. And you've seen, other nations who've tried to negotiate with President Trump on tariffs, the Japanese and others, come away frustrated because they don't really know what the president wants. And you have some in his administration saying that these tariffs are just a negotiating tactic to try to get better terms on trade deals. But then you have the president himself suggesting that they may be permanent and be a revenue replacement for the income tax. And so there's no coherent strategy or coherent, policy that I can glean from. What I do know is that in my state, in Rhode Island, we import Canadian electricity. We import Canadian stones to help supply our jewelry manufacturing industry, which is a big industry in the part of the country that I come from. And I can give many other examples. So I don't see it as particularly helpful or constructive. But again, I'm glad to see the president backing off at least some of his more extreme plans, and hopefully that progress will continue.
It seems as though there is going to be a more formal process going forward. At least that's how I interpret what Prime Minister Carney had to say today, that officials are going to speak over the next couple of weeks, and then the leaders will meet again face-to-face in the middle of June when the president comes to Canada for the G7 summit in Kananaskis. What do you hope to see in that process over the coming weeks to show that maybe there is a de-escalation in this trade dispute?
Yeah, I hope to see a continued normalization, between the United States and Canada, and I hope that the administration will also listen to the American people, because in all of the public opinion polling, the American people do not like tariffs with Canada, do not like tariffs with Mexico, do not like the notion of trying to take over other countries, be they Canada or Greenland or Panama or any others. Like, this just isn't what the American people want. There's China, I think, is a different case, and many of us support a tougher approach vis-a-vis China. But I just hope that the president and the administration will listen to the American people who want a return to normal when it comes to our relationship with Canada.
Do you feel better or worse about the state of Canada-U.S. relations today? Because I tell you, the anxiety levels in the Canadian government going into this, they felt they're prepared. They felt they had a plan. They're trying to keep expectations low. The Prime Minister made a papal reference saying you won't see white smoke. We're not seeing black smoke coming out of the White House either, so that's a positive sign. But the volatility of this had them worried. How do you interpret things after what appears to have been a reasonably successful first time face-to-face here?
Well, I think we're all feeling better than we were 24 hours ago. This is a situation that we never should have gotten ourselves into to begin with, but it is what it is, and I'm glad to see positive forward progress.
Rhode Island Democratic Representative Seth Magaziner, it's good to speak with you again, sir. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.